Okay. All right. Thanks. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for being here. We're here today to launch a new House task force, the Congressional Task Force on American Hostages and Americans Wrongfully Detained Abroad. I want to thank my friend and colleague, French Hill. Thanks for your commitment to this issue. Thanks for your longstanding advocacy for Americans unjustly held abroad, including your advocacy on behalf of the Kamalmaz family, whom we'll hear from shortly. When I came to Congress in 2010, my constituent, Bob Levinson, had already been held in Iran for 3 years. Here we are 14 years after Bob went missing, 11 years since I began working on Bob's case, and tragically, 1 year since we learned that Bob had died. And we still don't have closure for the Levinson family. Bob was the longest held hostage in American history. He was a husband, he was a father to 7, grandfather to grandchildren that he never had the opportunity to meet. He and his family deserve justice, and I will not stop pursuing it on their behalf. But it's my experience advocating for and trying to help the Levinsons navigate the U.S. government and working to ensure that their voices were heard that led me to write and pass the Robert Levinson Hostage Recovery and Hostage Taking Accountability Act. The legislation, which was signed into law last year, will help ensure that these cases are always given the priority that they deserve and that families are always given the support that they need from the government. Now, this task force will exist in the U.S. House to provide that same support to other hostages and to their families. It will also serve as a resource for members of Congress to navigate how to best help their constituents in these really challenging, difficult moments for them. We'll use the task force to project a voice in Congress on behalf of those wrongfully detained and held hostage. We are grateful for the support of the Foley Foundation, the Syrian Emergency Task Force, and so many other groups, as well as returned hostages and their family like Nizar Zaka. I am looking forward to working with the Biden administration. We are in the weeks to come, and look forward to the day when all Americans currently held hostage and wrongfully detained are home where they belong. This is an issue that every American should consider personal to them. Thanks again, everyone, for being here. And with that, I will turn it over to French Hill.
Thank you, Ted. Sure. Well, first, let me welcome everybody on this beautiful place at the corner of the U.S. Capitol in Washington today. And while we gather today on this beautiful day, a lot of our families across the United States have a hole in their heart for their missing loved one. And I'm so delighted to be supportive of this very good idea from my friend Ted Deutche of Florida, the American Hostage Task Force. This is the first congressional organization of its kind on this topic. More than 2 years ago, I learned of a former Arkansas resident, Maj Kamalmaz, who'd been arrested in Syria in 2017 while attending a family member's funeral. I felt it was my duty to act on behalf of the Kamalmaz family to do what I could personally to help bring Maj home to his loving family. And I've met with the family on many occasions and had the honor of hosting Maj's son, Khalid, during the 2019 State of the Union speech. I'm committed to doing what I can do to help bring Americans home and have been inspired by the courage of families with loved ones who, like the Kamalmazes, are held abroad. I want to take a minute and thank President Trump, Secretary Pompeo, and Ambassador Robert O'Brien for the inspiration I witnessed at the State Department hosting these families and showing the empathy and giving them the information they need to have some hope for their family member being reunited. According to the James Foley Legacy Foundation, there are more than 50 publicly known Americans wrongly detained or held abroad against their will. And I'm sure there are many other Americans in similar situations around which we don't have information. I can't imagine what it would be like to know a loved one was overseas and learned they'd been wrongfully arrested by a corrupt government or held hostage by a non-state actor. And it's in this regard that Ted Deutche and I got together to create this task force. It's only through comprehensive and an all-of-government approach with Congress and with the administration working together that we can bring Americans home, take care of those affected families, and disincentivize those corrupt governments and non-state actors that would take an American hostage. Getting the Robert Levinson Hostage Recovery and Hostage Taking Accountability Act signed into law last Congress was an important step in codifying into law the U.S. government hostage recovery apparatus, that all-of-government approach. And I thank my friend Ted Deutche for his legislative leadership to get that bill over the finish line and to the President's desk. I look forward to working with him and a bipartisan group of like-minded legislators to help families bring their loved ones home, educate other members of Congress on how best to advocate for those families, and I look forward to the balance of our presentations today. Ted, thank you. I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you very much. French, thanks for your advocacy, your leadership, and your bipartisan commitment to working together on behalf of these Americans wrongly detained and held hostage, and importantly, their families here in the United States. We'll now hear from Margot Ewan, the Executive Director of the James W. Foley Legacy Foundation.
Thank you so much. Thank you to Representatives Ted Deutche and French Hill for their leadership today in creating this crucial task force to support Americans held hostage and wrongfully detained abroad and their families. And we're equally grateful to our partner organization, the Syrian Emergency Task Force, for working alongside us at the James W. Foley Legacy Foundation to push for this critical mechanism for the past year. It's so wonderful to see this actually created today. And we want to thank the Kamamas family who are here today to speak about their loved one, Majd, wrongfully detained in Syria. You are not alone, and we stand with you. And unfortunately, these other families are experiencing the same fate, but we are here to fight with you to bring them home. According to our data, as was mentioned earlier in Representative Hill's remarks, there are at least 53 publicly known cases of Americans held hostage and wrongfully detained abroad in 13 countries. Some are being held by terrorist organizations, while others are held by foreign governments seeking to obtain political gain in exchange for their release. In our third annual report on the efficacy of U.S. hostage and detainee policy that we published last week, we found that 2015 policy reforms and the 2020 adoption of the Robert Levinson Hostage Recovery and Hostage Taking Accountability Act are largely durable and effective. But despite these strides, there is so much more work to be done. Critical improvements are needed in hostage prioritization, leadership continuity, timely intelligence, declassification, and information sharing with families, and more comprehensive mental health and reintegration support for returning hostages and wrongful detainees. Additionally, there is a critical need to hold hostage takers, both non-state actors and foreign governments alike, accountable for their crimes so they are deterred from this horrific practice. It is incredibly concerning to the Foley Foundation that, with the exception of last week's great news and release of American journalist Nathan Mong from Myanmar, no American hostage or wrongful detainee has been brought home in the past 7 months since President Biden was elected. We know he and his administration care deeply about this issue, so we need him now more than ever to make this a national priority, and we know we can call on the members of the Congressional Task Force to help keep up the pressure on our own government to do what is right and bring these Americans home. Actions like today's creation of the Congressional Hostage and Detainee Task Force are essential in not only showing solidarity with families who have a loved one held abroad, but they are a key component of the whole-of-government approach needed to bring Americans home. It's incredibly encouraging to know that both sides of the aisle are dedicated to freeing American hostages and detainees, showing that partisanship has no place in this fight. I'll close again by thanking Representative Deutche for his leadership on the House version of the Robert Levinson Hostage Recovery and Hostage Taking Accountability Act, and his support of his constituent Bob Levinson, the longest held hostage in U.S. history. We're equally grateful for Representative Hill's enduring and critical support of his constituent Majd Kamamas as his family worked tirelessly to bring him home. To all those members of Congress working similarly to support their constituents or simply working to free fellow Americans, we thank you. And to those who have not yet had the opportunity to do so, we implore you to join this task force and help us bring Americans home. Thank you.
Well, we're delighted to have Maj's family here represented, and they have been prayerfully hoping for Maj's return from Assad, Syria, for many years. And, you know, I hope that in this administration, President Biden will use his leverage to open Assad's jails, to get cooperation from the Russians on ending the conflict in Syria, and that once and for all we can use the congressionally supported bipartisan Caesar sanctions to bring Assad and his henchmen to justice. And in the meantime, we are all praying for Maj's return to his great family here in the United States. And let me invite his family members up to speak.
Thank you so much. I would like to thank Congressman French Hill and Congressman Ted Deutche for their great work. And no matter what I say, no matter what I do, I can't show our gratitude and our love towards everybody that's helping us out, especially the congressmen. They've spent so many hours, so many days, and I know that for sure because we felt it. I hope nobody has to go through what we went through because it's very hard. It's extremely hard every second of every day of every year. We're waiting and hoping. So hopefully now we have something to look forward to. We're so grateful. Words honestly cannot describe our gratitude and our love for you and your work. We thank you so much on behalf not only of the Kamanaz family, but every hostage held abroad. We thank you so much. We just need to feel President Biden's love and help to these hostages that are being held abroad. I know my brother deserves to come home. I'm sure everyone's son deserves to come home. Thank you to everyone that wrote a word or put effort in helping us, the Foley Foundation, the Syrian Task Force. I appreciate you. I appreciate everyone. Thank you so much. Love you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for being here. I want to acknowledge Nizar Zaka. I mentioned earlier, we're so grateful to have you here. We're so grateful that you're with us. Nizar, do you want to say a few words? Please. Yeah, please.
Thank you. I just want to highlight about the task force. It's so much important for us as former hostages because pain that is inflicted on us while we're hostages, a lot of it comes from the outside. And having such a task force for families to go to discuss, to know what to do, it's so important. And when we get freed, and with all the help that we get from Congress, but there is a lot of things that hostages need, and there is no place to go to, such as just getting your credit report back in shape or getting your taxes. I'm still getting hunted to pay my 2016 taxes. So thank you for doing this. Thank you so much.
Nizar, thank you very much. Margot, thank you. And to the Commonwealth family, thank you for being here. And my friend French, thanks for your leadership. I just finished by saying this is about the over 50 Americans who are currently being held, but it is also about the commitment of this Congress on behalf of the entirety of the American people to recognize that when there is an American who is being held wrongfully in another country anywhere in the world, that American must be viewed by all of us as our family member, as our neighbor, as our loved one, and that we will not rest until they come home to be with us. And with that, I don't know if there are any questions.
Well done.
Yes.
Are you all satisfied, or what was your reaction yesterday to the way that President Biden brought up the two Americans in Russia and the outcome of that conversation?
Yeah, why don't you start on that?
Well, I'm the important what the president showed yesterday is what we're the point that we've been trying to make consistently, which is in every single meeting that takes place with a country that is currently holding Americans, there must be a priority of bringing up these wrongly held Americans as a key part of that conversation. It's true with Russia. It's true as talks move forward with Iran. I have had multiple conversations with the Secretary of State, administration officials about these talks with Iran to ensure that that this issue is at the top of the list. And I'm glad that the president realized that, and this group, our new task force, will work to ensure that at every meeting between high-ranking government officials, any official delegations from America and these countries, that these Americans not be forgotten, that they be made the priority that they deserve to be, and that their families deserve.
Does this include the one remaining Navy governor or personnel that's being held in Afghanistan? You spoke to the administration about that? What they're doing?
With the administration, one of the things that that's important about the legislation in putting this into statute for the first time is that the position the family shouldn't have to re-engage and try to figure this out again every time there's a new administration. So the Special Envoy for Hostage Affairs, Ambassador Carstens, has carried over from the last administration, and I think that's a really important step. And all of these individuals will continue to be made a priority.
Anybody else?
Anyone else? Yep.
How did you guys end up working together on this?
Well, this is one of the reasons we realize this is so important, is because when an American is taken hostage, every member who represents that individual and represents their families comes to this usually for the first time and wants to know what to do. And there's this realization, as French and I realized, that there are, unfortunately, a large number of members of Congress who have been through this. So we interacted on, in this case, the Kalamazes, and French knows the work that I've done on behalf of Bob Levinson. Our offices worked together, and ultimately we came up working with the Foley Foundation and others with the idea of trying to bring everyone together so that members, when something like this happens, would have a group that they can turn to, and that their constituents could turn to for help.
Yeah, this is important, and we used in our remarks, and certainly in Ted Deutsche's legislation. This is an all-of-government approach, and the first response for members of Congress is to serve their constituents. And in this work, it's challenging. We're talking about classified information. We're talking about diplomatic relations. We're talking about a State Department that's a rather private organization and doesn't frequently share information, even with people who might have a need to know or an emotional connection. So the idea of a special envoy is really breaking down those barriers. Ted Deutsche's legislation has done that, but we want to do this as an educational component for our members of Congress so that they're better able to serve their constituents that are confronted with this horror. And I think it will be welcome. In addition to unifying the legislative branch and the executive branch when we're out visiting with foreign governments and making America's foreign policy known, but the primary issue is to serve our constituents and make sure they get the attention and care and empathy that they deserve from their American government, because we're not leaving any American behind.
I want to just acknowledge Nizar again. The message that we're sending is certainly a message that we're sending to families and to governments around the world, but to those Americans who are being held hostage. We know from talking to Nizar that when there is a focus on their cases, that they'll sometimes hear about it. and that it's helpful, and that if that's part of this, if what we're doing not only helps to bring them home, but in the meantime gives their families, and most importantly, gives them hope, that's something we owe to them.
How are you all reaching out to other colleagues looking forward? What are you hoping the task force will look like in the next few months?
Well, certainly our staffs will collectively inform our colleagues on both sides of the aisle that this exists and talk about those things about how to meet the needs of constituents, as we've talked about. Secondly, to have one voice when members of Congress are traveling abroad, and this comes up in a bilateral or multilateral forum, to be informed about these issues, to be understanding how the State Department's Office of Hostage Affairs operates. So it'll be service-oriented and information-oriented, and I think it'll produce terrific results, both diplomatically and hopefully bring more Americans home, because we have that one voice diplomatically when we're out representing our country, and that we bring more empathy and a better response to help these constituents understand what's happening with their loved one that's held abroad.
I'm a senior member of the Foreign Affairs Committee. Travel is just beginning again as we come through this pandemic, and our hope is that that our task force will be widely enough known that when trips start to take place again, CODELs visit some of these capitals, that our members who are traveling and their staffs will reach out to us, so that we can be sure that, as French says, in those meetings that take place there, that this is a topic that they know matters. Okay, time for one more, if anyone? Yeah.
So last week, Representative McCall called on the Biden administration to make the release of Mr. Lee and Mr. Reed as a precondition for the summit that took place yesterday. What are your views on that? Do you think there's more room for the administration to pressure these bad actors
I think that there's always room for pressure. It's also incredibly important for heads of state, for senior government officials in countries, in these countries, to hear directly from high-ranking American officials. Certainly to hear from the commander-in-chief that the release of Americans is a priority, is the priority in whatever else we're discussing. This is going to remain at the top of the list.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, this is not an optionality. These are not, this is something that we stand on. I would always condition releasing Americans before we have a civil dialogue with another country on a bilateral basis, because we can't have a decent conversation until we get certain things off the table, like Americans being held illegally abroad. So I'm glad it was raised. I understand Mr. McCall suggesting that it be a precondition. I think anything you can do to make that more forceful is better, so I would certainly think that would have been a good suggestion. The president took a different direction, but he did raise it, and that's what we all need to do on a bipartisan basis.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all
everyone.
very much.
Thanks.